sales. The scourge of foreclosures continues wreaking havoc, not just in people's lives, but by blighting neighborhoods and creating massive legal inefficiencies in the housing market. And yet somehow there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of motivation in Washington to put a stop to it. Joining me now for more is Jim Carr, the Chief Business Officer of the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. Jim, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Chris. My pleasure.
Jim, we've seen the foreclosure crisis kind of continue and continue. It's been a little off the radar screen. I want to start by asking, what grade would you give the White House, the Obama administration, on their foreclosure mitigation efforts?
Well, the grade I would give the program that's put into place, which is the Home Affordable Modification Program, I'd have to say that program is failing the test. As of right now, there have been about maybe 340,000 permanent modifications, Chris, and just last month alone, and that's in the entire year since last March. So for a whole year, about 350 permanent modifications.
Wait a second. 340, 350, that's it? Not 350,000? 350.
1,000. No, 350,000. Sorry.
Okay.
But last month, thank you. But last month alone, we had 322,000 foreclosures. Since the beginning of this year, we've had already more than 1.6 million new foreclosures. We're en route to 3 million this year. So clearly that program is not up to par.
So what we're looking at is modifications happening in the neighborhood of 10% of the foreclosures that we have.
Exactly.
So what should the president be doing? What should Congress be doing if the current program that's in place to do these workouts and modifications isn't working? What is a plan for a solution that would work?
Well, Chris, from the very beginning, it was very clear the foreclosure crisis had a number of dynamics going on. We knew that, for example, program elements such as having the program be voluntary and letting the services volunteer to participate was a problem. We had seen that all the way through the Bush administration. It's still a voluntary program. When the HAMP program was put into place, it didn't have penalties to actually compel the services who did volunteer to be in the program to actually comply to the program rules. So we've had a host of problems with compliance with the program. At the same time, the problems of foreclosure have morphed since the program was put into place. So, for example, foreclosure is now driven principally by unemployment. There is no real program in place right now to deal with the unemployment components. There have been, they've introduced some program elements. They're not fully in place yet. Principal reduction has been a major issue for more than a year now. The rules on principal reduction still are not in place for the HAMP program.
So let's talk about principal reduction for a second, because I want to make sure the viewers are with us. I mean, the mortgage has two components. It's got the interest on the loan. It's got the principal, which is, the actual value of the home that you paid for. The point is that it seems like to get to a place where it's sustainable for a lot of people to keep in their homes, banks are going to have to write down the value. That's what you mean by principal reduction.
That's exactly correct. And the fact of the matter is the banks received hundreds of billions of dollars in bailout, and the borrowers didn't. And the fact of the matter is that every failed loan was a compact between a bank or an investor and the borrower. And putting the money in on the investor side has helped the banks recover, but it hasn't done anything to stem the foreclosure crisis. So we need to address the fact that many homes are severely upside down, and to make them actually affordable to the borrower, we need to reduce that principal. Now, here's the interesting thing. In many cases, Chris, people could actually sustain their home, avoid foreclosure with basically a 30%, a 40% write-down in the value of the loan. But instead, the servicers are allowing those loans to go to foreclosure, at which point, in many cases, these homes are worth less than about 45% of the value. So the reality of it is that allowing consumers to modify these loans to make them affordable is actually in the best interest of the investors, and that's not happening.
Last question real quick here. I guess as a practical matter, what does the president have the authority to do independent of Congress on things like going after the principal or write-downs, or does there need to be statutory, some legislation passed in Congress that could make that happen?
Well, there needs to be statutory changes passed. And to be fair to the White House and the president, they actually proposed one of the most powerful tools to stem this foreclosure crisis would have been to reform the nation's bankruptcy laws to allow a bankruptcy judge to weigh in and create a modification that was suitable both to the investor and the borrower. The president asked for it. Congress has rejected it. And, Chris, what's interesting about that is that alone could have addressed 30% of the foreclosure crisis at absolutely zero cost to the American American taxpayer. So instead, we have these very expensive alternative approaches rather than going to bankruptcy modification. And why is that? Because the banks don't want it. We need to really challenge the status quo on the banking system and really put into place mechanisms to require modifications where they're in the best interest of the consumer and the investor, and to allow bankruptcy judges to weigh in. It would cost no money at all. And final thing, Chris, we need jobs. And Laura, in your previous segment, pointed out the fact that we need jobs. Chris, if we don't get jobs going, we're going to see this foreclosure crisis continue and potentially expand.
Jim Carr of the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, I really appreciate you coming on tonight.
Thanks, Chris. My pleasure.